Here we go.
Well, thanks everyone for joining. We're going to give it a little bit longer, let some of the people get in here and join us. So we've got 20 attendees so far. We've had 175, so we should see more than that joining. So I appreciate you all taking time to join our webinar, and I appreciate our panelists joining. So we are very honored to have the panelists we have joining us today. They have some very interesting backgrounds. I mean, not your typical CSOs that you know, but definitely great practitioners in their past, and just kind of have a good idea of how to run organization as a CISO, as well as how to deal with practitioners and so forth. Having that practitioner background, I think, really helps. I think sometimes people have the business side, maybe missing out on some things, but definitely looking forward to the insights of you all. The pre meeting that we had to prepare for this webinar, we had a really good discussion, so I'm excited to hear what you all have to share today.
I'm just going to say, I think you are way overestimating me in this case. If you're saying that I know how to be a CISO, well, we're just making this up as we go along. Totally. At least I am.
Well, you are all amazing to me, and you're like the first three to come to mind when I was wanting to do this, and also too with the fact that just the backgrounds that CISO roles are different. There's different types of CISOs, but working directly with CISOs and at one time being a direct report, seeing that, you just kind of I appreciate the backgrounds that you have, because you take some people come from more of a business background. Some people are former CIOs moved over to the security side and that type of thing. So it's a special role. Then you take all the responsibilities that CISOs have these days. A lot of cases you get breached, you're the target, you're the one to be blamed. So it's a high stress position. I don't think CISOs are really respected the way they should be sometimes, but it's a huge role. So before we get started here, why don't we go around the room? We'll start with you, Alyssa. Why don't you introduce yourself and share your background for our listeners?
Yeah, so Alyssa Miller, I'm currently Chief Information Security Officer for Epic Global. And no, that is not Epic, the gaming company. No, that is not Epic, the healthcare company. It is Epic, the legal services company. Just to remove that confusion right away. My background is kind of, as you said, it's a little crazy. I tell people, a hacker all my life. Bought my first computer when I was 12. Broke into an old online service, some of you might remember, called Prodigy. Back when I was 12, got into a computer science degree through all sorts of, gyrations, was a programmer, developer for the first basically 10 years of my career before I transitioned into cybersecurity, first as a penetration tester, and then through different consultancies. I've worked for a VAR for a while, I worked for a vendor for a while, and ultimately now I've kind of landed in what I set as a goal for my career, which was to get to that CISO role.
And also, I'd like to add too that BISO role too, that had to be an important experience too, and not all CISOs have that experience. So when Alyssa tells you she's an Epic CISO, she's not bragging. That's the company she works for. So,
never heard that.
Yeah, with me, you get the dad jokes. I'm sorry, I'll try to limit that today. And our next guest I'd like to introduce is Dave Belanger. So Dave, why don't you introduce yourself and share about your background?
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, my name is Dave Belanger. I'm the Chief Security Officer at Bestow Life Insurance. Bestow is a leading edge life insurance tech company. We enable policy application process 100% online, and in some cases you can have a policy in about 10 minutes or less. It's really an exciting technology and background that I've never seen in life insurance before. Bestow is both direct to consumer, and we offer an infrastructure, a SaaS service to larger insurance companies. My experience and background, I started off in IT. I was a data center manager, managed a facility for about a decade for a telecom company, and just kind of moved over into IT and security type roles and involved more with a focus on security. My experience and background as a security executive has been in healthcare, telecom, corrections industries. My total experience, I've been working in security or some form of one of the security domains in over 25 years.
Amazing background. And last but not least, Jason Haddix.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jason. So very similar, I would say, background to Alyssa. Came up in the industry as a offensive security professional, pen tester, red teamer, did source code review. So I worked at some small consultancies in the early part of my career, and then eventually had my first big leadership role as the director of penetration testing for HP. And then left there to be an executive at BugCrowd, which is a bug bounty platform, and then left there to take my my first real giant security leadership job, which was at Ubisoft, the video game company, which was an eye-opening experience, and got to deal with all kinds of great stuff there and work with an epic team. And then currently I serve as the CISO and hacker in charge at Buttobot, which is a red teaming and adversarial emulation consultancy.
Yeah, very, very interesting backgrounds. Most of you, I knew what you did, but thanks for sharing that. And so one of the first topics we're going to dive in here is the role of a CISO. So there's different types of CISOs, different types of CISO roles. You have some that are more business oriented, some people that come from more compliance background or moved in from other areas of IT. So it's interesting how that role has kind of evolved, and some people are more business oriented because they have to talk to the boards and deal with some of the business groups. So that's some of the CISOs we're seeing these days. So what are the skills to be successful as a CISO? Alyssa, we'll start with you.
Ooh, so skills or role, or I think you asked a couple questions there, but we'll get into all of it. I mean, the way I look at the CISO role is, it's one of honestly education more than anything else, right? I think, the CISO, the obvious answer is we're there to drive, some type of cybersecurity strategy and program for the organization. But what is that why? What are we actually doing? The way I look at it with the CISO is our job is really to educate both ourselves to understand the business, but then educate the business, educate the executives on what is appropriate for our cybersecurity posture. And to that end, the reason why I put it that way is I think a lot of times as CISOs, we get wrapped around the axle of, oh, we're here to reduce risk, right? Well, boy, that is like the least sexy way to describe what it is that a CISO does, because there's so much more than risk reduction that we should be focused on. It's how do we educate the business? How do we enable the business to accomplish what they need to do at the end of the day? Because we've got to drive revenue at the end of the day. No matter who you are in an organization, that's the end goal. The goal is to drive revenue. And so how do we educate that here's how we do this in a way that's going to keep us safe? This is how we're going to protect ourselves and our customers' data and so forth. Here's how we can do all of those things, adopt all those crazy technologies that you guys want to use and provide all those wild services like, to the online world, but do that in a way that's safe. That's ultimately what I look at as the CISO role. And so what that turns into from a skill set then, because you kind of asked a twofold question, is, you definitely need, I shouldn't say you definitely need, but what I think are key skills that help are, having that technical acumen, to be able to understand what your team is telling you, to be able to understand what's going on in the IT space to some degree. You don't have to be an expert. I mean, you don't need to be able to go in and build Terraform scripts in AWS or something, right? I mean, that's not necessary, but you got to be able to understand it, but then be able to translate it and be able to translate it to the other side, which is the business, which you also need to be able to understand. How do business finances work? What does EBITDA mean? Things like that, right? Those MBA concepts, and make that translation between the two.
So Dave, what is your opinion on this, the skills of a CISO?
You know, it's interesting, and it's tough for me to try to stay focused on one thing in particular because there's so many opinions about the role of the CISO, and it's definitely, we've seen it evolve so much just over the last decade. And probably the best indicator of that is to go out and look at CISO roles that are posted and look at the description of what the companies are asking for. I think it really depends on your company on what the role of the CISO ends up being. And there are some certain baseline things, cybersecurity risks. But for instance, if you land at a company that doesn't have a chief risk officer or somebody who truly understands risk at a holistic level for the business, the CISO by de facto becomes that person because they have the nature of our role is to understand risk as it would impact a business at a larger level than just the technology side of the house. It used to be, if you looked at the CISO role a decade or 15 years ago, the CISO would be configuring firewall rules and they'd be more heavily involved in the tactical side of things. And that's changed drastically. It's very strategic now. There's probably pockets of companies that have a more technical CISO, but as cyber risk and breaches become more public, companies are focused in on hiring people who can strategically bring the company not only from the standpoint of internal protecting the crown jewels, but everybody else in the world is looking at their third parties and saying, how is your security? So I think I would have to zero in on the sales piece that Alyssa mentioned is, as a CISO, you need to be able to go in and respond to those enterprise partners and those clients that send you those giant DDQs, and you can't just go through and answer them yes, no. You have to have robust answers, and if you have to answer no to something that they're asking you for, you need to be able to think on your feet and be creative and identify the compensating controls that address the things they're asking about and provide robust answers. Because ultimately, from the standpoint of security and assessing risk, we're the face for our company to sell our security posture to potential clients.
So Jason, what about you? What's your opinion on this?
Yes, I think there's different types of CISOs depending on different types of businesses, like Dave said, right? So a vendor CISO is different than a cloud native CISO is different than a CISO that has to manage a legacy enterprise. And they all have different responsibilities in different role. A cloud native company that hires a CISO might be looking more for that tech focused CISO that's going to drive more strategy and configuration and might still get their hands dirty. Any one of those could have a different profile. So it really depends on the company that you're going to. I think they already mentioned one of the core skill sets is being able to sell, or at least in my experience, if I look back at my day-to-day, was like PowerPoint and Excel, right? And meetings, right? And being able to convince people of you're selling the dream of security, and you're selling the dream of security that doesn't get in their way. And so it's absolutely true. And you're building PowerPoint decks to describe what you're trying to do, and you're in Excel or some other management software to make sure your budget fits what the company has given you, and you're trying to do your best to reduce risk with that. And so really it's a combination of leadership skills, but I am also a huge proponent of that anybody who enters the CISO role does have to have a baseline technical knowledge to understand the strategy that their leaders are trying to put forward, because you are that one person that's standing out in front, talking about the plan, talking about what's going to be executed. And most of the time, you can't bring your team to the board meeting, right? You can't bring your team to the executive meetings every day, and so you have to be strong in strategy and strong in tech, at least at a decent level, in order to drive that security strategy with confidence. So I think those are some of the key skill sets. I think also you're a giant recruiter. You're a marketer sometimes, you're on webinars and podcasts putting out there that you're trying to do the right things. I mean, yeah, we're here. I mean, it's definitely a multifaceted role nowadays. Definitely more, like you have to be more dynamic these days to hold the role, and you have to have really thick skin because it is a stressful role to sit in the CISO seat. No one who hasn't sat in that seat can tell you about the sleepless nights and the incidents and the heartburn and maybe probably even the tears for most of us. Having to deal with some of the stuff, especially if you really care about security. So.
Yeah, just the stress you must have, you almost have to go through because some other areas security managers may mess up or something. The CIO, usually it's not so much that their job is on the line for things. It's really not completely in their control, because if you get breached, there's some cases you can be doing everything you need to be doing right, and there is the chance that you get breached. And some cases you could lose your job from that. And so kudos to you for putting up with that. I mean, you definitely as a CISO, I'm sure you really making sure you're doing your due diligence and performing your job the best of your ability, having that kind of pressure on you. Saw someone recently mention that their description of a CISO, one of the things they do is manage relationships, between the business units, between the different IT groups, the vendors, and all that. So
100%. I mean, that's, again, when we think about business enablement, I mean, that's a fashionable term right now among a lot of CISOs, right? I enable the business, and it's interesting when you ask CISOs how, because you get a lot of different answers on what that means. But you touched on one right there, Phil, and it's that, do you have a CISO who can stand up in front of your customer and explain your cybersecurity strategy in a way that's meaningful to that customer and is going to encourage that customer to want to partner with the business? That alone can be such a tremendous part of the job, right? I mean, just being that kind of face of the program, it's definitely something I think a lot of CISOs get pulled into.
Yeah, I don't know if we're stealing any thunder here from a question, but there is additional, even more scrutiny on the CISO role now with certain court cases going on and the liability for the company. I mean, it's starting to veer into the question of does that liability fall on the CISO somehow if you get breached? And so, although I've always worked with companies that are very supportive and nothing like that I think would have happened to me, I know that more and more CISOs are talking about it, and they're like, hey, do I need to start carrying like personal risk insurance to sit in this role? I'm not getting paid enough for that type of risk and to be that type of fall person for an organization should something bad happen. And no one is 100% breach proof, right? Like you do your best and you put your best foot forward and your best strategy depending on your company. And but there's always going to be an opportunity for a hacker or some ransomware group to do something, and there's always going to be a new zero day tomorrow or the next day or the day after. And doing your best might end up in a situation where something happens. And yeah, so it's definitely a conversation that's happening right now among a lot of CISOs I know. And there's been a couple of reports on it and stuff like that. So it's an interesting conversation about the personal liability aspect of the job now.
So just kind of curious, the stress of the CISO and the risk of losing their jobs being out there. Have you witnessed or seen, any kind of trends in CISOs stepping down from those roles, or just kind of retiring or just getting out of that type of role because of the stress? Are you seeing much of that in the industry?
In the circles I travel in, I've not. I've seen a few who've fell victim to the banking industry and troubles there, but I've not had any conversations in the CISO circles I travel in where they're leaving those positions because of the stress. What I do see is a lot of collaboration among those CISOs in supporting one another and making it through with resources and advice and things like that. The DFW CISO community is very tight knit, and they talk amongst one another regularly. Very supportive. That's what I've seen.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say I've just kind of seen some of that on LinkedIn, some mentions of that. I hadn't witnessed it myself, but I just wanted to see if you all had. So Alyssa, I'm sorry.
And that is true. Like, I mean, I think you see it a lot. I think more so in the CISO community than you do with other, C-level execs. Like if you go to some of these CISO events, so much of it is really focused around, not having somebody present, but doing roundtables and things like that, more so than like I've gone to other executive events where it is a lot of like they bring in big name presenters and whatever. But to the question about, I haven't seen CISOs quitting their jobs, but what I have seen, and actually I found out is actually being backed up in studies. I jokingly tweeted something the other day about, the drinking levels of CISOs. And it was just a joke because I just had a frustrating day and was really feeling like I wanted a drink. And it turns out there have been studies, and there really is an accelerated level of alcoholism among CISOs and other, self-destructive behaviors. And I mean, we can argue lots of reasons why that might be. Maybe it's just that we have all the vendors taking us out for drinks. I don't know. But the reality, one of the speculations, and I believe it, is that the burnout in the job leads to, kind of higher levels of, alcohol consumption or other other ways of coping mechanisms that might not always be so healthy. And I mean, I feel that, right? Because, it is a stressful job. It's not so much, I don't know about, David and Jason here, but for me, it's not so much I'm worried about like, we're going to get breached and I'm going to get blamed and get fired. I'll probably get blamed and I'll probably have to, have some conversations, but it's more, it's the constant, and speaking of Twitter, I also tweeted about this. It's that, the constant push and pull of, hey, cybersecurity is super important to us. We're fully committed. We want to do this. But then every day, practically, it feels like you're having another conversation where you're having to justify why you even exist, right?
Yes.
And so that alone creates a ton of stress for me. I don't know, Jason, you run into that too?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a meme the other day on Twitter, and it was two jars, like coin jars, and one was like cybersecurity importance when there's no breach, and it was like empty jar, and cybersecurity importance and budget when there was a breach and the jar was full of coins. And so yeah, you have kind of this I don't know, like importance level, or at least backing from the business during times when everybody understands that you need to do something, and then other times you can be kind of the biggest business de-abler. I don't know if that's a word, but yeah, I mean, it's like almost like you're trying to justify, like Alyssa said, your existence. But I haven't seen a ton of CISOs resign outright. I have seen what I like to call a lot of walking dead CISOs, where they continue to hold their positions, but they've kind of given up on their passion and security, and given up on kind of the objectives that they came into the role with. And these CISO Slacks and CISO, specific meetups or conferences that you can go to. I mean, boy, are they groups therapy sessions more than any other conference I've been to with these same topics that we're talking about. It's like, like budget, retention of employees, misalignment with the board, misalignment with the executives, misalignment with other technical groups in the organization, like hardcore compliance stories, people who have dealt with, hardcore incidents, facing nation state actors, like, so it does add up, and I've definitely seen a lot of like resignation, which, hopefully people can work through, because it wasn't an easy last 3 years, honestly. Like, to add everything else that was happening in the world on top of having the constant stress of a role like this can really bring you down. I know it did for me, for sure.
So next question here. So how does the size of organization affect the CISO's role?
I'll kick this one off because I have a very passionate feeling about this. So having worked as a security leader in both big and small organizations, it makes a giant role. It makes a giant difference. So when you have an organization, like I mentioned, maybe it's cloud first, and you're still, somewhere around 200 or 500 or maybe even sub 800 employees. You can still understand where all of your technology is. Hopefully, you can still understand most of the business relationships you have. You are still pretty much one mission, one brand, one product, usually. And if you're cloud native, you have all of the tools to manage that, handed to you in a package. As you go to CISOs who manage multinational organizations and, maybe are, plus, I don't know, like maybe 1,000, 2,000. I mean, Ubisoft was 22,000 employees, which is a lot. And you have multiple product lines. Each little product is like its own business, and that means that nothing is standardized. It means that you're dealing with legacy tech. It means that you multiply the demands of the role by X number of products or pieces of the business. And so this can be where you need to scale out a CISO role with maybe some BISOs or something like that to support. But honestly, that's only a fraction of companies that are able to do that. So I rank CISOs in grizzledness or like experience by the ones who have sat in that seat of plus 10,000 employees and had that level of stress. And then right below that is CISOs who have handled a lot of employees but are maybe cloud first or kind of new school technology where it's all co-located in one place and easier to manage. And then the bottom rung of CISOs is vendor CISOs, who are really just fancy salespeople with the CISO title trying to go out there and sell their product. So that's how I rank CISOs. CISOs hate it when I rank them like that, but it's the truth. So yeah.
You reminded me how jealous I am of those people that are in that one product, one mission space, because man, I walk into my first CISO role and it's, we've got all the business lines where, if you include some of our LTEs, we're, a little over 10,000. So I'm just realizing, wow, yeah, I forgot what those days were like.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, it does shift. And then you can even go from, you say, greater than 10,000. There's also another step when you go from like greater than 10,000 to like greater than 50 or 100,000. You get into like these massive
companies,
organizations, and you look at what those CISOs are putting up with. I mean, in some ways, I almost feel like they get luckier in some ways because those are the ones that can usually afford to bring in, either deputy CISOs or BISOs or both. I'm sitting here right now in about that 10,000-ish range, and I'm working to try to build that with even just a single BISO at this point, because I need somebody that can get out there and bring that business intelligence, because I can talk to all the different business lines all day long and I kind of get what it is they do and I understand it and I know what a lot of their unique challenges are. But day to day, to stay on top of that and understand what new things are taking shape for them, I'm one person. I can't be in all those spaces, and I really need someone who that's their full-time job. I mean, for me, I've got to think about, yes, what is going on in the business, but I also got to think about what's happening with my SOC, what's happening with my vulnerability management program, what's happening with our IAM program, and all the other myriad of things that happen on a daily basis. So I like the way you put that, because I think those are really good kind of brackets. If we're going to generalize, I think those were some really good ones.
So Dave, what are your thoughts?
So my role now is currently the second tier of what Jason mentioned. It's a smaller organization with a smaller footprint. But I've been at the larger type organizations and I've lived the trial by fire with the breaches and hacks. And I think it's just the nature of the role is you have a bigger sprawling footprint. You've got a bigger headache to deal with. You need more resources. But I will say this, that my approach there and my approach here has been exactly the same. I have a framework based on industry standards. I have my own personal experiences that I've added in to what I've built at Bestow. And from that perspective, it hasn't changed. What I need to do is the same. I still need to keep up with what's going on in the industry and threats and risks and things like that. The sprawl, the threat landscape is smaller just by nature at a smaller company, smaller footprint, smaller threat landscape. But ultimately, my approach and my framework is the same.
So I guess I have a question for you, Alyssa and Dave, real quick. Sorry. So one thing I experienced as a CISO was in the bigger-ish seat was the fact that when you're running any of those programs, like you mentioned, Alyssa, like the SOC or more like programs like IAM, right? Like that actually ends up being like kind of like a political campaign to convince the other parts of your business to enroll. You don't have a mandate to, in most companies, you do not have like you are the law to institute a lot of those security programs. And so what you end up having to do is go on the road like a politician and campaign to get them to opt in. And I think a lot of people don't know that that's part of the job. So I would love to hear you and Dave talk about like if you have that experience.
Jason, are you setting me up? Because this is like something I'm so passionate about with CISOs. The understanding your place in the business, right? For so long, I felt like CISOs we felt like we were like the oversight. We were the authority. We were the ones who could mandate. I've heard CISOs in organizations I've worked with in the past use that term. Well, we'll just mandate it. You know what happens when you mandate something to the business?
People riot.
They laugh and walk away. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, we've all lived this world, I'm sure. When it comes down to revenue versus security, revenue always wins. And the business will do everything they can. If they don't like something you're doing from a security perspective, they will do everything they can to show why what you're trying to do is going to impact their revenue. And when they take that to the full executive committee, you lose. And this is something that is really important, I think, for CISOs to understand. And this goes back to that empowerment and why risk reduction isn't really a good selling point as a CISO. If you can show them how you drive value for them, that is like the best way to get them on board. So I'm going to take, because you brought up IAM and the whole IAM program, right? Here's a perfect example of how you do this as a CISO. So I want to institute, let's say I want to bring in, an MFA solution. I won't name names, but we know some of the names that are out there. And I say, hey, you know what? We want to get all of our customers that are connecting to your applications onboarded to this. And, so now you start to talk, and of course, the initial reaction is they're going to resist because they're going to be worried their customers aren't going to like having to go through an MFA step, whatever. But now when you start to say, hey, but by bringing in this solution, here's what it's going to do. It's going to allow us to federate and create a whole single sign-on feature that you can now sell as a value add to your customers. That's a new revenue stream. Because we're bringing this product in, it's going to do the MFA thing. It's also going to create that whole SAML interface for you. You won't have to change your app at all. It'll get everything onboarded, and then we'll use conditional access to minimize the amount that they have to input, an MFA challenge and whatnot. And now suddenly you said, hey, this thing I'm doing is going to let you grow your business, let you create a new revenue stream. They'll jump right on that.
Yeah, I think if you look at the role of the CIO, even before the CISO, CIO back in the 80s, 90s, pre-CIO role where a company just had a guy who did the wiring in the closet and he came fix your computer and he did all the technology for your company. And then as companies start to figure out that, look, we need to get ahead of this. We need somebody who can look down the road into the future, 5-10 years, and put things in place to make sure that we're scalable. And that role was forced to evolve. And I think it's a lot the same with the CISO. I think in our role, we need to be good salespeople externally, but also internally. And a lot to what Alyssa was saying about, presenting that as opportunities for revenue growth. We can do the same thing, but more towards, selling it as a multi-year strategy. It's like we need to position the company 3 years out to be ready to face this threat or to be ready with this technology. The one I like to talk about a lot is heuristics. It used to be called heuristics, everybody's talking about AI and ML now. Like, I think people just got sick of writing heuristics. Is it EU? So we made it AI. So it's kind of evolved. The technology has evolved, but as a CISO, we need to look out multiple years and demonstrate how it could be maybe not in every case revenue opportunity, but a cost avoidance. Look, let's spend this money now, put this technology in place now, because 3 years down the road, if we decide to do it, it's going to cost 3-4 times as much. And so in a lot of ways, in addition to being a chameleon, a CISO needs to be a bit of a fortune teller. But that, I mean, and that's not pure luck. That comes from the constant need to be looking at technologies and evaluating what's going out in the world.
Yeah. No, I love that, because I kind of put them into, we're going back to the tiering, kind of like Jason did with CISOs. I'm going to do that with like your value prop, right? I think I kind of look at it like there's 3 levels. There's good, better, best, I guess, in terms of their effectiveness in winning over the business. Definitely cost avoidance is huge, right? That is the best place to start. If you got nothing else, at least show them how you're going to save them money, because there's always that compression pressure. The next is if you can show them how it creates a competitive advantage. And this is going on right now. I'm super excited. You mentioned AI, and everybody's all fired up right now about open AI and chatbots and all this, right? CISOs who are ahead of that right now are positioning their organization to say, here's how we're going to do it. And we're going to be the ones that can go out there and say, yeah, we're offering this technology, or we're leveraging it, we're innovating with it, but we're doing it securely. So we're not going to be the next Samsung in the news about exposing IP through ChatGPT, right? And then the best is where you get that revenue. If you can actually show them it's going to drive, tangible new revenue, well, great, that's even more exciting. But any of those are all meaningful value that you can bring to the business as a CISO. That's way better than just saying we need to do this so we're secure.
Yeah, I think the levels, if I put them in my head, it's like we can help you make money, we can help you not lose money, and then the bottom rung is just like every other argument, which really doesn't play super well. But yeah. Yeah.
So as CISOs, I know you have to deal a lot with the board and executive management. Are there some strategies that you recommend for dealing with the board to make it easier to communicate your message to them?
So the irony here is that for the last 20 some years that I've been in cybersecurity, we've been complaining that we didn't have a seat at the table. We now have a seat at the table, and it's getting more powerful. We can talk about SEC proposed rulemaking that's going to establish even more formal role, but we've got the seat at the table, and unfortunately, a lot of CISOs, I don't think we're actually ready for it. Here's my advice, and I'll sum this up real quick because I want to let Jason and Dave dive in here too. But first of all, figure out how to tell a story, because no one cares that you have 9 million open vulnerabilities this month versus 7 million or 10 million last month. That doesn't really mean a whole lot. Yeah, they get big numbers, little numbers that tell me that little numbers are better than big. Okay. But make that meaningful. Why? Why did it go up? Did it go up because you just had a new acquisition that came in and exploded things? Did you get new visibility into a place in your environment that you couldn't see before, and now you're discovering more vulnerabilities? Being able to tell that story is so much more important than putting a bunch of graphs and numbers and things on a slide deck and presenting that to the board. Second, be able to deliver it fast. Anybody who's like read books on presenting to the board, you've probably seen this, or if you've read blogs or anything else, you got to be able to get the most important, get that story out there in the first 3 minutes, because after that, they're going to do one of two things. Either they're interested and they're going to start asking all sorts of questions, or they're completely disinterested and their faces are down in their cell phones and they're not even paying attention to you anymore. So, being able to deliver that story quickly. And then finally, just know your audience. You're going to find out that board members have very, very, very diverse backgrounds. I mean, I've had a board member ask me at a previous role, what's a CISO? how did you get on a board? And you don't know a CISO, but then you look at their background like, okay, so you came from all these smaller startup worlds, and that's why they brought you to the board, was to bring that perspective. So just being able to understand those elements and speak to this, but this goes back to that whole being a good salesperson that Dave was talking about before.
Yeah, I think to add to that, you need to be able to speak to a higher level, and you're not presenting metrics to somebody highly technical. Like I wouldn't present the same metrics to the board that I do the CIO. My recommendation is 2 slides. So I would have a slide that shows the overall maturity of the program. Here's my security, here's the security program, here's all of the control areas, here's where we are with our maturity. Use CMMI or something like that and say, here's where we are in our maturity, here's where we want to be in the next 12 months. And then the next slide is maybe the top 3 or top 5 risks to the business, and here's what I'm doing about it. And in a common language, not a specific vulnerability that we're going to do this patch to or whatever. Bring it up way high level, 2 slides tops, a couple of sentences each one, and let them ask the questions and digest it. In terms of like CISOs, there's a lot of talk about CISOs on the board and things like that, especially with the SEC regulations coming down and all that. I think there is going to be a need for having security people who are knowledgeable in cybersecurity on the board. I don't necessarily that means that we start putting CISOs on the board. I think in a lot of cases that would be a mistake, but just depending on the individual. But just because you're qualified to be a CISO doesn't mean you're qualified to be on a board. I think there's definitely a need, and there's been a need for a while to have somebody with cybersecurity knowledge and some level of expertise sitting on the board who can digest what the security executive at that company is doing and saying, and to be a champion to them if they're presenting risks that have serious implications to that business or its revenue. Then and they're not selling it, they'll have a better chance of getting that communicated if there's somebody who understands the language they're speaking who's sitting on the board.
I think tactically for CISOs who came to the webinar and kind of want to know tips in this area, right? So one kind of plays off of what Alyssa said, and Dave said, is I treat approaching the board like I treat content discovery. And if you don't, or not content discovery, content creation, like being a content creator online. If you don't hook them within the first 30 seconds, you don't have them for the rest of the call. They have a million important things to do. The second reason that's really important to tell a story, tell a compelling story, keep it brief, but brief but detailed, in any fashion you can, is because the board, you only get, most of my CISO friends only get the opportunity to see their board maybe 4 times a year, if that. And so what's important is to get the program out in front of them, evangelize it, even though I hate that word, but evangelize the program, tell the story, and then shove everything else that you might need if there is a technical member of the board, because sometimes there is, in an appendix, and just have it ready, right? And so if you need stats on your vulnerability management, or you need stats on, like breaches in your industry, and I have all that ready in the appendix, but mostly I'm selling the program, what I'm trying to achieve, and I'm trying to show iterative progress on the program, depending how long I've slated it out, right? Was it a year-long program? Was it 3 years, 5 years? Have we had to pivot due to recent things? One of the most important things you can do is also sell your hurdles. So at least in my experience, there's always something that's going to come up every year that derails the original, dates and times that you wanted to execute on your program, right? And it's important to talk to them about that, right? And sell it as, either a benefit, or sell it as, we got through this, crazy thing, and it's important to put that in there before you just launch into your program, because otherwise they're thinking like, oh, I thought this was going to get executed by this quarter. And then the research on your board is also really important. So be a hacker before your board, right? Go out and research your board members and their experience and what they did before they were board members, right? Some of them were CTOs, so they're very technical. Some of them you are CEOs and they care about the bottom line more than anything else. Some of them are very employee centric and want to know how morale is doing, and so you can draft your presentation. But remember, a board meeting is only 4 times a year for some people. Sometimes you get it more, and you are only a subsection of that board meeting, so you have not that long to present your case. And really what you're trying to do in that board meeting accomplish is give them information about the program, and you're also kind of selling your program back to your CIO and all the other executives who are in that board meeting as well. Because if the board members approve of your plan and they like it, then that gives more confidence to the people that are actually funding your plan, like the CFO at your company and your CIO and things like that. So you're selling to everybody, not just a thing. I've seen plenty of CISOs go into board meetings and kind of poo-poo on the rest of the organization. That is a big no-no. Because first of all, you're creating enemies, and second of all, you want to be selling everybody in that room so that you get what you need to secure the organization. So.
Yeah, I want to actually touch on something you said there because it's something I really like, but there's a trap there too. So I like Dave. I do 3 slides. Dave does too. But whatever, it's the what did we do? Where are we now? Where are we going for me? And then there's the appendix, like you mentioned. But here's the thing about the appendix. Yeah, put all the data in there, whatever. Don't fall into the trap of thinking they're not going to read it.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of times we all get in that mode where anything that's in the appendix is a bunch of numbers, we're not going to look at it. You are going to get those board members who are going to look at that and dig into it, because usually in those board meetings, they get that slide deck a week in advance in a lot of cases, or they get it in some level of advance notice. A lot of them will actually read through that. And so
on their own time, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, if you stick something in there that doesn't fit the story you're telling, that can be really bad. Or if you put something in there that looks horrific and you kind of gloss over it, that won't go well either. So just be aware that what you do put in there in numbers, make sure that it is digestible in the way that you want it to be received. Even if it is bad, it's okay to have things that look bad. Our vulnerabilities jump by 30% or something, or our adoption rate on MFA isn't where it belongs or whatever. That's okay. But to your point, Jason, it's like, yeah, now build that into, okay, what's the obstacle there? What are we doing to overcome it? Or, hey, board, here's where we could use some help. I need something to draw on here that we can help overcome this particular obstacle. Every so often you can kind of pull one of those out of your hat too.
Just on tips and tricks too, before it flies out of my brain, is so when you're presenting to the board a difficult decision to make for security, it's important to frame it with bookends. And there's there's psychological research on this. When you present anything to anybody and you present 3 options, the cheapest, most least effective option, the middle ground option, and the most expensive, hardest to do option, people will naturally gravitate towards the middle solution, thinking that it is the split of both worlds. And so let's say you had to implement something that was really expensive and caused some friction. Make sure to bookend the decision making in the process that you made with the other 2 of how hard it could have been if you did it a different way and how crappy it could have been in another way, so they understand that you went through this decision making process with the risk and the business in mind. And so I've had a lot of success with that.
And I hate saying it goes without saying, but so often it needs to be said. Probably the worst thing you can do when presenting to the board is present problem or problems without presenting the solution. So when you identify something that is worthy of reporting to the board, you should have a solution to it, or multiple solutions, as Jason suggests.
So kind of on the same subject, kind of pivoting into, what is some of your advice for CISOs? You've had some really great advice so far, but I think we'll just kind of get your opinions on what you'd advise other CISOs to help them communicate more well with the organization and be more successful in their role.
It's hard. It's one of those things that's hard to know where to start because there's a lot of different. But I'll focus mine on a problem in the industry right now, and it's like you hear a lot about the shortage in cybersecurity hiring. And honestly, I think that is part an actual talent shortage, but part self-inflicted. I think as security leaders, we need to get more involved in the process to write the job descriptions and vet the candidates. And I think that in a lot of cases when CISOs are having trouble onboarding people, it's only partly a gap in the talent. And the other part is unrealistic job descriptions that the CISO should get their more hands-on in those, and just insist with HR on taking your input for those roles. And just to give you one example, and then I'll turn it over to Jason and Alyssa. Self-described hackers, usually hired for like penetration tester positions. If you Google this statistic, over 80% of them don't have a college degree or are opposed to high-level certifications and things like that. So if you have an automated hiring system and your HR department writes your senior pen test role and they apply, requires a bachelor's degree, you're going to have like 80% of your candidates automatically by the system just bypassed. So you're going to wonder why you're not getting any candidates for this. If you dig into who's actually submitted their application, you may see some real experienced pen testers in there, and they don't have a college degree, or they don't have a bachelor's degree, they have a 2-year degree, or they don't have a degree at all. A lot of them are self-taught, and I think that the industry's shooting itself in the foot with some of the red tape requirements. It kind of goes back to like the 1950s where you need a bachelor's degree to work in the office. Otherwise, you go work in the factory. And that's not the case. There's so many opportunities to learn and self-teach now that it doesn't necessarily require 4 years of sitting through lectures to be qualified for a position in cybersecurity.
Can you repeat the question real quick, Phil? I just, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I'm asking your opinions on advice that you would give to other CISOs to help them perform better in the role as a CISO.
The best advice I ever got from a friend of mine who was a CISO at a unicorn tech company, which I took and ran with and was super successful, was create a security engineering team. If you're one of these CISOs that doesn't have a strong single product and you have multiple products, and you are a CISO of a large group of employees where it's fragmented, build as part of your prongs of your organization a security engineering team that can actually fix vulnerabilities instead of find them. So one of the most successful teams I managed in my career was a strike team of basically 10 generalist developers and security configuration specialists and different technologies that could parachute into any part of the business and actually help developers fix issues quickly if they were needed in an emergency, and maybe even needed not emergency, maybe needed on rent for a longer term of service, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months sometimes. And I would deploy this team. And so having the security engineering team, we broke it down into security architects, security engineers, and DevSecOps. And we broke it down into those 3 flavors and created teams for different products, because a lot of times with multiple product branches, you're not going to have the money to have product security associated to every product. It's just not possible. The business can't afford security people in every vertical of the business for every product. And so for you being able to provide that kind of service is really valuable on rent to those people, and then parachute out and then come back. And so that was one of the things I think was one of the best pieces of advice that were given to me in building that team. Was one of the most rewarding, I think. The other is kind of off of Dave's saying is retention of employees. I think that a lot of times the discussion right now is focused on hiring employees, but I think actually retention of your good employees is a bigger problem at most of our companies, right? You can have Google or Microsoft or Meta come and just back up, a dump truck of money to your best engineer, and it's like, okay, now what do I do, right? Like I lost my best person. They were managing all this stuff. I loved them, and so I talk about 3 things that you can do to retain employees really well. And so it's create an internal brand for your security team. It's utilize the idea of totems, which are things like awards, challenge coins, yearly swag and stuff around your brand, and rituals, things like meetups and team barbecues and award ceremonies and things like this. And although they sound like small things, these really create the connective and human tissue between your staff, and make them, I mean, I know people don't like to use the term family, but they make them at least friends, and very tight-knit coworkers. And so building a team with this connective tissue means that your employees are more sticky, and they could get offered, a moderate increase from a bigger company and say, nah, I like where I work. I like the people I work with. I like that my boss prioritizes these things. I love the work-life balance. I'm really attached to the brand and the mission that we're building here. I mean, if you think about, I don't know if it's a bad analogy or not, but the military, right? Like they do have a single mission and a single brand, and people believe in it, right? Because of different reasons. You can build that in your security organization. It requires a leader who's very transparent about what they want out of their team. And so that means you have to be that leader. You have to be very transparent with your team about what your goals are, what you need them to execute on. But I have never seen stronger teams than ones that were rallied behind, some sort of brand and a leader that utilizes those tools. So.
And so I've got 2 things I'm going to throw in here. First of all, Dave, I love like everything you said is something else I'm completely passionate about. So I'm going to skip over that. But 2 things that are kind of related that if I could get CISOs just to understand and focus on, I think they would all do, it would help. First is my favorite quote from Winston Churchill. Perfection is the enemy of progress. Okay. I see so often people have these big ideas and they want, they want to come up with the perfect cybersecurity program, the perfect cybersecurity solution, that they forget to just make incremental progress. Just start fixing things, right? You're going to get in there, especially if you walk into a little bit large organization, you're coming into, probably there was a CISO before you, you're picking up where they left off. There's going to be things that need to be addressed. Just start chipping away at that block, right? Don't feel like you have to melt the entire iceberg. Just chip off little pieces at a time. Make some incremental progress. Every CISO, not every CISO, I shouldn't generalize, but a lot of CISOs, part of the drive is we want to come in and we want to make a big impact. We want to, we want to put our stamp on it. We want to create some big new revolutionary program. Those don't happen unless you can come in first and make some, just incremental progress and have some small wins, quick wins that show that, you can drive things forward. And then that feeds to the second thing, which is know your organization and what position the organization is in, from a maturity perspective and capability perspective. You go into an organization, you say, you know what? We're going 100% zero trust. We're gonna grab the NIST model. We are going 100% zero trust. That's my thing. Well, you better have your boots ready because you're going to be working on that now for the next 5 to 10 years. And you have to find a way to now keep that interesting for your board, for everybody who's involved, because going zero trust is not buying a tool and installing it. Going zero trust is an inherent change to the culture of the organization and everything about your cybersecurity program, how software is developed, the whole 9 yards. So you need to understand, is my organization even close to ready to take on this huge strategic initiative that I want to accomplish? Or do I need to focus on specific areas that I got to improve maturity in and get us to a point where now we can start thinking about what zero trust is going to look like in the future? Or am I small enough that, yeah, we can make, we're dynamic enough, we can make a quick shift and bring those inherent changes in culture? Or do I have, a huge multinational with tons of different divisions who all operate, as Jason said, like their own business, where it's going to be lethargic trying to change that culture. So be aware of that, and bite off the chunks that you can actually chew. Wow, I'm throwing all the little cliches in here right now, but again, don't go, don't let that chase after perfection be the thing that stops you from making any progress at all. I've seen too many of our peers fall into bad situations where they bit off way more than they could chew. The business wasn't ready for it. The business kind of rejected it, and they got looked at as an ineffective CISO.
Awesome insights. I appreciate you all joining, but unfortunately we're down towards the end of our webinar. I do appreciate you joining, and I appreciate all the people that are attending today. So it was a great time, and I look forward to seeing you all at RSA.
We'll be there.
All right.
Yep, I'll see you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.